I'll bet you can't guess what this video is going to be about. That's right, it's time for another computer video, because you know what they say, a PC a day keeps the apple away. I probably shouldn't actually make jokes like that, considering that I will be editing this on a Macintosh later on, and if it picks up on my snide attempt at humor, it may throw an unexpected creative loop into the process, and that just would not be any fun at all. What we're looking at today is something that will undoubtedly be familiar with many computer buyers of the 1980s through the 1990s, all the way up to the early 2000s, and in fact even right up to the present day if you happen to be located outside of the United States. We have a Packard Bell mini tower computer system here from the mid to late 1990s. This is the Multimedia S618 model. Its little brag sheet explaining all the wonderful features it had for the time is still very much in place. So too is the Intel Inside MMX Pentium processor identification sticker, the machine's identification tag, and even, although it's in slightly rough condition, the Designed for Microsoft Windows 95 sticker. Now this particular computer was what you might call a recycling rescue, though definitely not one of the usual sort. My parents and I take our trash and we sort through it and pull out all of the recyclable stuff, and then we take it off to a recycling center. Well, the recycling center in question only accepts paper, plastic, metal, things like that. Stuff that comes from the regular household trash, glass, those sorts of things. They do not accept, and they had signs up to the effect saying, "Don't leave any electronics or computers here." And unfortunately, people abused the program, and thus the program from the particular city that offered it is no longer available. And this was how people abused the program. They oftentimes left derelict vacuum cleaners and television sets up there. Nothing good. Really, really crappy things that had just been rode hard, worn out, and put away wet. And the television sets certainly weren't any better after the copper scrappers got to them. They turned them into a huge mess. I really don't profess to understand that, but I guess when you're in it for the metal, you really don't care how you take something apart. Now, I certainly hope that this will be a shorter, sweeter, and much more to the point video, though I know that many of you out there in the viewing audience have expressed support for my longer videos. So what we're going to do with this machine, which was found loitering around at that recycling center, along with a Mag InnoVision 19-inch monitor that I did not pick up because it looked to be in pretty rough shape. The glass on the CRT was actually scratched. We're going to go ahead and hook this machine up and see if it works. But before we do, I'll have a little overview of the case and this machine's features and the little brag sheet on the front here, and maybe some interesting commentary along the way. Interestingly, this machine is not nearly as badly yellowed as some of its counterparts are, which surprised me, especially since it spent time sitting in the sun at the recycling center, and it also spent about a week outside in front of my garage before I finally got around to bringing it in. And unfortunately, that does mean, well, it kind of sort of got a little bit rained on, and I truly hope that the Packard Bell enthusiasts in the audience will not absolutely come unglued with my having done that. I certainly beg your forgiveness, but the computer is inside now, and a few raindrops here and there certainly shouldn't have a massive effect on its longevity. So what did you get when you bought the Packard Bell Multimedia S618 model? Let's go ahead and have a look here. You got a 233 megahertz Intel Pentium processor with MMX technology, a 6.4 gigabyte hard disk drive, 48 megabytes of system RAM. That was one of the things that Packard Bell kind of loved to do. They would cut corners in the most interesting ways, although 48 megabytes was certainly not a bad amount of installed RAM for the time. Really highfalutin users would have had somewhere between 64 and 128, and most of the rest of us mere mortals probably would have been working with approximately 32 at the time. So the number is not too bad, but it certainly could have been better, and this machine's performance might have benefited if it had matched memory modules installed. You also get a 56K capable modem featuring X2 technology. That modem is one of those lovely things that Packard Bell enjoyed including in their computers so much. It's actually built in to the sound card and probably has rather questionable compatibility with operating systems other than what the machine shipped with. Rounding out the hardware roster, we have a 24-speed max variable speed CD-ROM drive, and this is such a great big selling point that they tell us about it not just once, but also on the drive itself. The drive probably one of the highest quality parts of this machine, although I certainly do not mean in any way to be running down the Packard Bell name. Their computers really weren't too bad, and if you look around, you can certainly find plenty of them that are still running, and given their attractive pricing, they sold a lot of them back in the day. The only bad thing about Packard Bell computers back in the day, some of them were never quite right out of the box, and if you started to modify their configurations, if you added expansion cards or upgraded various facets of the system's hardware, well, you could be in for a lot more fun than you had hoped for. I remember someone who told me that a member of their family worked for 3Com, and the saying at 3Com, or at least this person's saying, was that they engineered things for two types of computers, PCs and compatibles, and Packard Bells, which is a pretty good way of summing things up. So let's go ahead and take a look at the side of the machine here. It's got a bit of a scuff mark on it because in addition to sitting outside, this thing also spent about another week riding around in the trunk of my mother's car. And yes, that means my mother knew that I had picked it up. She threw a small fit because even though she appreciates the fact that I'm interested in computers and things like that, she kind of tolerates my collection, and sometimes not always in the best way. Usually as long as I keep them confined to the basement, I'm fine, but if they wander into other parts of the house, I will be in trouble later on for sure. You'll notice that this case is actually a two-color case. The predominant part of it is beige in color, or slightly yellowed, as most of these systems are. Even this one's a little bit yellowed. The camera doesn't seem to show it, but by the time the video gets finalized and edited and all that good stuff, it may look a little closer to its actual color. This bottom gray panel was actually intended to be changeable. You could get color customized panels for these computers. I do have a set of these. My mother had a Packard Bell Legend something or another early Pentium era desktop, and my dad actually bought a package of the color modification kit for that machine. This one would have used a different, larger set of them, but the ones that my dad got back in the day were available in kind of a fire brick red, a greenish color, and a blue color. I don't remember exactly which set my mother's computer is wearing, but one of these days I will haul that computer out of storage and I will make a video about that. The way things are going, that might be tomorrow for all we know. She got a lot of use out of that computer though, and it endured a lot of upgrading over the time. It started out running Windows for Workgroups 3.11 and ended up running Windows 98 2nd Edition by the time she retired it in around 2007 or 2008 in favor of a white Core 2 Duo 17-inch iMac. So let's go ahead and see what we've got here on the back panel of the machine. We have a power supply with a very nicely isolated fan. You know, most computer manufacturers, both then and now, simply put the fan grid right up against the edge of the case, but Packard Bell actually put a nice little plastic molding over it. We have an information plate talking about where the machine was manufactured. They did do a lot of the final assembly on these things in the United States, though some of their older models were assembled overseas, and maybe some of these were as well. We have an informational barcode label containing the machine's serial number, a set of expansion slots, both PCI and ISA both, complete with some spider eggs. I imagine that this machine has sat in storage for a very long time, which is why before we power it up, we are definitely going to be having a look at the inside to make sure that there is nothing grossly wrong with it, and that hopefully there is nothing living in there. Over here you can see the combined sound card and modem. Like I said, these things were not the best idea. They generally worked acceptably well as long as you stuck with the operating system that the machine came with. But if you switched to an operating system whose driver model was a great deal different than what Packard Bell had shipped the machine with, you probably wouldn't find drivers for these. And if you did, they probably wouldn't work quite properly. But here we have a game port, the 3 connections for output, input, I'm probably getting these wrong, and then the microphone down here, and ultimately the phone jack, which has a little bit of flora and fauna in it. So we'll get that out of there if I at all can. The rest of these slots are open for expansion if you're really feeling lucky. And someone commented in my video about the Gateway Celeron machine. They mentioned that the color coding for the ports was wrong. Well, it certainly does disagree with the current standard that every computer manufacturer has settled on today. But back then, all the computer manufacturers, many of them at least, had started to realize that it might be a good idea if they color-coded the connections on their various computers so that people would not have a hard time getting things hooked up. And naturally, if there's one standard to choose from, there'll be 10 of them. You know what they say. The wonderful thing about standards is that there's so many to choose from. I'm not sure who to attribute that to, but I'm sure someone will mention it in the comments. I want to say Grace Murray Hopper, but I'm not sure that's correct. It has little practical bearing on our discussion here, apart from the fact that the color codes varied widely until Microsoft finally decided that they would use some of their clout within the industry to enforce standards based on certain year-specific revisions of the PC hardware classifications that they had put out, like PC 98, PC 99, those sorts of things. So the color codes were definitely highly variable depending upon manufacturer, but if you did the thing that you were supposed to do back when this machine was new and you bought all Packard Bell branded accessories, well, the color codes would match up and your computer would be very easy to hook up, at least as far as the monitor, mouse, and keyboard are concerned. As you can see, this machine has 2 USB ports on the back. It would have been one of the earliest consumer-grade desktops to offer them, and the Windows 95 operating system was ultimately patched to allow for some USB device support, but as usual, Microsoft threw around their weight in the industry and made sure that most USB devices will not actually work properly under Windows 95 because Windows 95 does not support the WDM drivers that most people authored for use with USB devices on Windows 98 or later. These days it's really a bit of a moot point, and if you want decent USB support in an older Windows family operating system, you probably do want Windows 98 at the earliest, because Windows 95 has just the most remedial support for it, and of course Windows NT 4.0 absolutely does not have any. Moving up a little bit, there's a printer port with a simple gray color beneath it. Probably matches a lot of the printer cables that people were using at the time. And then at the top of the ports here on the motherboard, we have a serial port. There are 2 knockout blanks here, and these are probably intended for use with a motherboard mounted modem. There was a design that Packard Bell had, and they got a lot of mileage out of it. A lot of machines had the knockouts for this on the back, if not the modem. I know that my mother's Pentium era Legend did. The 486 Multimedia machine that my dad bought new back in the day from Packard Bell did. Even the 386 SX class machine that he had. They all had the same exact modem knockout plates on the back. So nothing would surprise me if that's what these were intended for. At least one of them. I don't know why there would be 2. It would be very unlikely that you would have 2 modems, especially in a consumer grade machine such as this. Maybe they considered offering something like a specially fitted TV tuner, or even something that never made it to the sales floor in the first place. So that's a pretty good overview of what's on the outside of this machine. Let's go ahead and pop the cover and see what's going on inside. Alright, now, if I were to be perfectly honest with all of you out there in the viewing audience, I would tell you that I have kind of forgotten how these machines were intended to come apart. And it took me a little bit of ciphering, but I think I finally figured out where you're intended to start. Here we are looking at the underside of the machine. I have turned it completely upside down. And right away we can see that this machine has suffered from the very common migratory rubber feet syndrome. This is a very common thing to have happen if the computer is on a particularly grippy floor surface, or even something like a heavily carpeted surface that tends to grab at these feet and move them aside. So it might be a little entertaining to get this part of the machine open, just because these have moved so far over the years. Hopefully we won't have to fight that too much. I will say that it appears that even though the quality assurance seal is kind of battered, it is still intact after all of these years. So let's go ahead and see if I can actually get this thing to come open. I think this is intended to lift up, and this might be a two-hand job. But someone asked me, why don't I go ahead and use a tripod and actually get proof of what I'm doing here, so I guess I will go ahead and set up the camera tripod and see if I can embarrass myself in front of you, all you wonderful people here on YouTube. Alright, don't say I didn't warn you. This might be embarrassing, depending upon how my luck goes. And of course, I'm nothing much to look at, so keep your eyes on the computer. I've gone ahead and removed all the screws that hold this in place. I went ahead and moved the one infringing rubber foot out of the way, and I violated the machine's factory seal. So all these years later, we get to look at the completely undisturbed state of the magic inside. Who wants to place a bet on how much dust and fauna is growing inside this machine? It almost looks like maybe it was kept out in a barn or something toward the end of its life, or possibly even outdoors. I hope that doesn't mean that when we plug it in, it'll produce a loud puff of smoke and a bang. I'd really hate for that to happen. We go ahead and loosen this, and then the side panel just pulls away. And from the looks of things, folks, I think I'm going to be amazed here. What little of the circuitry I can see is incredibly clean. Go ahead and take a look at that. This machine has done very well for itself. I know that no one's ever cleaned it because the sanctity of that seal has not been broken, and it was still stuck down pretty well. So this thing has done pretty well. We got a little bit of spider web in there, but that's not too bad. So let's go ahead and take a closer look at the hardware inside this machine. Here they are, the internals of the beast. Let's see what we've got here. We have a Maxtor hard drive. I can tell that just from the printed circuit board and the case design, which is another sure sign that I've been messing around with this stuff entirely too long. We have our combination sound card and modem. Looks to use a Texas Instruments chipset for the modem part. And I would guess that this is an actual hardware modem with onboard signal processing, because as you can see, we have a little bit of random access memory there. So that's actually a point in this modem's favor. Like many of these combination cards that Packard Bell used, these were manufactured by a Singapore-based company known as AZTech or Aztec. I'm not sure how they intended for that to be pronounced, but you can see that whatever this particular chip does, it does have an OPL synthesizer on board. So FM synthesis paired with a modem. You can see some of the telephone line interfacing electronics here. Interesting that there's two relays. That would almost make me wonder if maybe this thing is capable of picking up a call on a multi-line phone system, which is something that you don't often, if ever, see in modems. You have a power supply down here. Not sure who actually makes this. Oh, it's another Aztec custom power supply. But at this sharp of an angle, I can't honestly tell you what the rating is. However, that should be a very high quality piece. And then we have the motherboard, and the motherboard is somewhat obscured by cables. I'm not sure I can actually do this without causing things to go crash. They did actually use what look like matched SIMs in each bank. What would you say, 2 8 megs and 2 16s? Not really sure. I know, that's embarrassing to admit to. Intel 430 series chipset of some kind. And then we have, up in the top of the system, more of the meat and potatoes of the motherboard. We have the system processor with a small heat sink on it, but it's got a fan, and amazingly that fan still seems to be good. We have the I/O riser, and I really think that in the later portion of their existence as an independent company that Packard Bell did in fact do a lot of their own printed circuit board design. They probably had someone else do the manufacturing, but I think that the design fell squarely upon them. We have some other interesting features on this motherboard, if my lamp will cooperate and let me shed a little more light on the situation. This motherboard has, unlike some Packard Bell motherboards of the time, actual level 2 cache implemented on the board. Now, it doesn't have anything like cache on a stick or coast module, which is proof that the computing industry does sometimes have a sense of humor. But you can see that there were some blank spaces for increased amounts of level 2 cache memory, although you would have to be something of a soldering wizard to use them. I also noticed something very interesting down here on the base slot that the I/O riser plugs into, and that is the 166 megahertz MMX designation. It makes me wonder if perhaps this motherboard was designed for a much slower processor initially, and if Packard Bell didn't simply discover that it worked with faster CPUs. We have Trio 64V graphics from S3, a very well-respected solution for the time. Definitely one of the better offerings, and right next to that we have the video memory for the onboard graphics processor. One thing that this brings to mind is the fact that I miss the time when there was actually decent competition in the graphics market. These days there are pretty much just two, ATI, NVIDIA. Now there's Matrox, they're still plugging along, but that's a very niche market that they participate in, and certainly not mainstream. But other than that, all we have are companies like Intel, VIA, SIS, and all they do are chipset resident graphics, and maybe not even that much for the companies outside of Intel and VIA. On the motherboard below the video chip, we also have a CR2032 battery, a surprisingly high quality one, Swiss made no less. Kind of makes me wonder if that thing is still actually good. I would have to say that if it is, I would be very, very surprised. So there we have a pretty decent overview of the hardware in the machine. There was one other thing I happened to notice while I was in here. Take a look at this. See the brand name printed on that capacitor on the modem and soundboard? Those are famous, not for good reasons. But it looks like it's still good, which is certainly unique. Of course, in its current application, it cannot be a very high-stress occupation that it has inside the system. Let's see what else we have here. There's a space for a fan back here at the end of the expansion card area. And yes, folks, although they were very rare when this machine was manufactured, there were still some expansion cards that could have filled this entire case and would have used these guide slots back here in this plastic former. This machine does not have a dedicated speaker. There's just a little squeaker can somewhere on the motherboard. There it is, right next to the microprocessor. I found it, then I lost it, and I found it again. And while there was a space for an optional fan back here, those punched holes in the back would have greatly cut down on its effectiveness, would have made it a great deal noisier, and it's obvious that Packard Bell ultimately decided not to bother with it. So, we've looked at the ins and outs of this machine. Let's see if it actually works. Okay, everything's all cabled up and ready to go. I plugged the machine into power and nothing obviously blew up, though with a machine this old, it is not a soft power switched environment. When you press the power button on the front of the case, you are actually applying line power directly to the power supply's internals, so there'd be no reason for it to blow up, unlike a modern power supply where it immediately enters standby power operation until you had actually applied power to it. Do I think it'll blow up? No, I really don't. But with all the flora and fauna that surrounds this machine and the signs of insects, I wonder if there might not be conductive crud in the power supply that might massively throw it off in terms of operation and cause it to blow up, because switch mode power supplies traditionally do not have any sense of humor whatsoever when they are mistreated. But you only live once, and I like to live dangerously, at least when it comes to playing with computers, so smoke test! Oh, and we have a lawnmower built into this computer, but we also have a power on self-test. And that hard drive, that didn't sound healthy. It was detected, but it didn't sound very healthy to me. Of course, it is running upside down, and that could upset it. Ooh, Windows 98 with the Plus Pack. Now, if you watched my last video featuring the Gateway computer, you'll know that Windows 95 with the Plus Pack for Windows 95 actually sold very well. The Plus Pack for Windows 98 was not nearly as much of a value-added proposition, and so it didn't end up selling nearly as well. We have the cloud wallpaper. We have a hard drive that's just grinding away over here. It's thinking about starting up. Let's see what we have here on the desktop. I love the recycle bin icon. Looks like there's some kind of a Snoopy related desktop theme going on here. Snoopy's hanging out on Greg's computer apparently. We have a recycle bin, Alex's fun stuff, a shortcut to my documents. Strange stuff's going on with this desktop, I don't mind telling you. Ooh, Iris Antivirus. Don't think I've ever heard of this antivirus program, but it seems like it's really up to date, I'll tell you that. Wow. You are currently protected with a computer antivirus program. The key to effective protection is a file of signatures which makes it possible to identify infecting viruses. Now is the time. Boy, are they telling the truth about that. Well, I don't have any means of getting this machine an internet connection. So we're running Windows 98. Looks like we have a copy of Microsoft Office 97 on here. Let's see what else we might have. Looks like we have the usual card of Windows related stuff. Some kind of a deer hunting game, another deer hunting game, Scooby-Doo game. I was hoping that maybe some of the original Packard Bell utilities were still on here, like the Navigator and things like that. I'm sure somebody has the Multimedia Master CD for this machine, or the Master CD as they were later called. Redneck Rampage, I wonder what the heck that could be. Microsoft Plus 98, there you can see some of the things that came with it. The desktop themes, the deluxe CD player. I didn't remember Picture It Express being a part of that, nor do I remember the Maintenance Wizard being a part of it, because as I remember it, that was one of the selling points of Windows 98 back in the day, was the built-in system maintenance that ran on a schedule. Packard Bell Audio Utilities. Well, they're just the regular Microsoft. Come back here. They didn't give you permission to do that. CD player, media player, sound recorder. This is the regular card of Windows provided players. And then an MPEG player, which is probably actually somewhat special. I can't imagine, this machine doesn't have any obvious MPEG hardware decoding capability, but a Pentium 233 with MMX support should definitely have been able to do that. Cool websites. How many of those you suppose are still online? Well, Disney and ESPN seems like a pretty fair bet. Not sure about Family Planet, and Packard Bell's website should still be online, at least for customers outside of the US. Let's see what we have here. We have Cyber Trio with a subfolder in it called Kiddos. Those icons are generic, so I wouldn't bet that program is actually in place and functional. Cyber Coach. Navigator Assistant. I don't know if that's Navigator proper or just something that bore the name and was slightly different. Manuals, registration, support center. Could register this thing. That'd be clever, wouldn't it? Packard Bell Support Center, software tracker, system credentials, and system wizard. We might go ahead and hit the system credentials a little bit later. An old version of QuickTime for Windows, old enough that it points out that all the programs that came with it are for 32-bit Windows. A Sierra game, Casino Deluxe 2, DirectX 2. Wowee, up to date, baby. Startup options. We have the antivirus program there, the Microsoft Office program, and Create a Card Plus 3, Forget-Me-Not Reminder. Software Toolworks Encyclopedia, probably needs a CD to run. Telecommunications, Microsoft NetMeeting, and utilities, of which there are only two, Iris Antivirus and Acrobat Reader 3.0. This start menu is actually long enough that it scrolls. So what else have we got on here? We have the various members of the Microsoft Office suite. These are the 2000 era icons, so I should have noticed that with the one up there for Word 97. So apparently this machine started out with Office 97, and someone later installed Office 2000 on it. MS-DOS Prompt, Outlook Express. Let's see, those are all things that most people are familiar with. The Office Small Business Tools Publisher. Beachhead 2000, I have no idea what that is. Probably some kind of a game. Create a Card Plus 3, and Core Designs. So that's pretty much everything that's on this machine as far as the software goes. But as I said, let's go up here to the Packard Bell category once again and just see what System Credentials happens to do. Oh wow, gives us all kinds of good information about this machine. The model number, the motherboard that it's got in it, the manufacturer's number, manufacturing time. Wow, it's pretty impressive, right down to the second that this thing rolled off of the assembly line and was confirmed to be alive. The format number, which probably refers to the software that this machine was originally running. And there definitely were some remote control, possibly even television capabilities offered with this machine. 105 key US keyboard, tower, no media select, no scanner, no remote. Over here we have the CPU details, and again, if you're interested in seeing any of this, you can certainly pause the video. It does not know what kind of video card it has, but it does know how much video memory there is, and that seems reasonably sane, so that's probably accurate. Doesn't really go into a great deal of detail about the sound card, just says SND4 and does not know the interrupt request line that's in use. So let's scroll down a little bit here. You can't maximize this window, and the scroll bar is right on the verge of being off the screen. That's productive. So go ahead and see what we've got here. Doesn't really tell us a whole lot more about the modem, but there was definitely a TV and tuner card option, as well as a radio card. I wonder if the two were actually separate boards. No network card, but that's not hardly uncommon for the time. Most people didn't have a need of one back in the day because most people were getting on the internet via dial-up when this machine was brand new, and I don't think that too many of us would want to go back to those days, at least not on a regular basis, especially not with today's excessively heavy websites that are just not dial-up friendly at all. I know there are people in more remote portions of the United States, at least, that dial-up remains pretty much their only low-cost option. And while I certainly had dial-up back in the day and got along well with it, I just could not imagine getting along with it today. This is a pretty sporty looking little program, really. I like the fake marble texture at the background. It really made you think you were getting something special. But it was soon offset by the fact that the Packard Bell logo itself is clumsily scaled, to say the least. I wonder what options we get. Smooth scrolling! Oh yes, yes, everyone needs that. That's how you make your brand new fast-running computer look like it's running a lot more slowly and in a more bloated fashion. Version 2.01 of the System Credentials utility. The other thing that I'm curious about as concerns the Packard Bell software on this machine is the navigator thing, this navigator assistant. Let's go ahead and punch that up and just see what it does. That's interesting. I don't think I would find that very useful. I think I would much rather have the screen real estate, especially since it's infringing on a desktop icon over here. But apparently that's what Packard Bell Navigator had become by the late 1990s. I know that the original Navigator proper was ported to Win32 and did ship with some Packard Bell systems, but it does not appear to be present on this computer. Let's go ahead and see what this software tracker option does. Please insert the Packard Bell master CD. I was afraid it would say that. I was hoping that it might maybe give me the option to see what software was originally loaded on this machine back when it was brand new. Well, that's about everything I wanted to say about this. I will go ahead and look up here in the kids item to see what these things are, but they're just a bunch of kid optimized games, things like that. No idea the name of the previous owner. Well, we can guess from some of the desktop icons maybe, but it just says preferred customer down here. So that's about everything I can think of to say about this machine as concerns the software and the state of functionality. It does seem to work. It should clean up pretty nicely. Not sure what I'll do with it, but you just never know when an early Pentium machine might find a useful role around here. So go ahead and shut it down. This is one of those machines that still did not have software resident control of the machine's power state. So even though it just spun down the hard drive, it's up to me to go ahead and press the big white switch. So thank you for watching, and feel free to leave a comment if you have one.